LanSchool, Big Brother made easy. I just got done teaching 1984, so like I'm super in the surveillance mode. But for those of you who don't know, we paid for the professional level LanSchool app starting last year, and essentially it's a monitoring tool. But there's a lot more you can do than just surveil your students and make sure they're not on things they shouldn't be on. Although that's easily one of the nicest things about it. Because if you ever stand up from your desk or you move away from where you've been standing and immediately see the kids like swiping down or clicking or alt tabbing, you know something's up, but sometimes it's hard to catch. And some of the Google apps and things they use, obviously, they're good at hiding that stuff. But LanSchool makes that very, very difficult. Um, so maybe, there we go. So yeah, I got my big brother's watching you reference. But anyway, some of the advantages are obviously the screen monitoring, and that's nice. It's not super fast. It's kind of like watching security cam footage where it kind of jumps a little bit. The frame rate isn't terribly high, but it's not to the point where you can't see what's going on. You can push your screen to theirs. So you can actually display whatever's on your screen on their laptops, which is really nice. So if you want to demonstrate something much closer, you want to make sure they're paying attention. If you push your screen to there, they lose control of their computer. So they can't like X out of it, they can't alt tab, they can't do any of that. You can message students. This is my favorite, especially when students maybe are starting to do something they shouldn't be doing. You can send a message and you can force them to read it. And I get kind of sassy sometimes, especially, if they're not doing something terribly awful, I'll say, is this what we should be working on? Or no, please no, and things like that. And usually they kind of laugh, they look up at you like, oh, he's watching, that kind of thing. Um, there is a voting/questioning system, kind of similar to Kahoot, but way less fun, I think. Yeah, my door does that. It's really creepy. So sometimes, you can ask them to take a poll, true, false, multiple choice, things like that, and it pushes the question to their screen and gives them the options, and you can watch them do it live. There is a web blocking feature, and the web blocking can get kind of interesting. If you block YouTube, you've blocked all of their Google. So they can't Google anything, they can't use Gmail, they can't use Google Docs, and that's because YouTube's owned by Google. And so when they use Google, they are signed on using an IP address, and you essentially end up blocking their entire IP address from the Google. Um, and so that can be kind of entertaining if you accidentally do that. And I discovered that last year, it hasn't. There's no way to fix that, unfortunately. It goes down to Google's and the way Google uses IP addresses. There is a testing/assessment mode, but we're not going to go over that because I haven't had time. I just discovered it. I haven't had time to really play with it and see how it works. Um, I also don't know whether we would want to use that because, the only benefits I could see are if you're trying to simulate the error test, for your end of course exams. And then it just gives you a lot of options for general classroom management. And like I said, proximity is a great way to make sure students are working, but it doesn't always work with online stuff. So the first thing you have to do is set up a class list, and I will show you how to do this at the end of the PowerPoint. I'll go through and kind of make sure it's easy to understand. Here we go. Let me go back. But essentially, up in the toolbar, you'll see something that says administer, and then one-to-one. And when you go over one-to-one, it gives you another little sub-menu, and it's manage class lists, right? And I will send this PowerPoint out to everybody as well, so you'll be able to zoom in and see it a little bit easier. I understand it's hard to see. But once you go to manage class lists, it's going to open up another window inside that's going to look like this. And when you load a class list or you have students selected, this little white space will be filled with their names, right? And there's a thing that says here, it says browse for students. And that's what you're going to click. And when you click that, it'll bring this up. And this is all the available students or laptops that are out there. Now, there's a little checkbox. You check all the students you want. You hit OK, and then you hit save. and you save it. You'll do like you normally do. You'll name it. I do mine like Brown 1, Brown 2, Brown 3. One time I have one on there, and I just haven't deleted it yet. I was covering for Miss Tinsman, and it was all students I had, so and they were working on something online. So I just created a class list and named it Tinsman Intervention or whatever it was, just so I could make sure they weren't goofing around too much. And you know, any time you are in a teacher mode, you'll be able to use this. Um, Brian does have another method for doing it, using Excel sheets from Moodle and class lists, and it's a little bit more labor intensive. If you really want to use that because you've used it before, feel free. I personally think the browse for students, click the checkbox, and click add or save or whatever it is the simplest way to do it. And then what happens to load a class list is you'll just go in, you'll go to manage students, load class list, and all your class lists are listed. You'll click the one you want, and boom, they load up on the computer. And I'll show you that when we're done here too.
Mike, does that include the students who brought their own devices in?
It's not work on bring your own devices. I think there's been talk about in the future making sure students have like LanSchool on there, but it doesn't work for them. And I caught a student the other day. Every time I'd stand up, he'd kill the brightness on his screen. And I noticed that, and I went over, and he's playing a game. I said, come on. I'm giving you an opportunity to work here. And in a case like that, you deal with it and you move on. I mean, kids will even do that. You'll see them, they'll hear you double click because they know you click somebody's screen or something, and they'll try to X out of it. But the nice thing is because it's so choppy to a degree, it's a delayed signal, so you still kind of see it. But pushing your screen, this is something that's kind of interesting. So push is kind of like a push notification on your phone. It means you are forcing whatever you have on your screen onto theirs. You're pushing it to their screen. I don't use it a lot necessarily because I do have the projector and the Mimeo and stuff like that. But when I was experimenting with it this past week, I did kind of like it that the students couldn't escape me. Right? The only way for them to escape is just to be totally unengaged off of their own world, and you notice that it's really easy to pull them back in. Whereas if I'm having them take notes on their computer or something, or if I'm having them watch me up here and they may have their computer out or a notebook out and they're doodling, they can escape it. So in this way, it's just a way of controlling the content of your classroom. And I'm not a huge fan of like overbearing police state control, but I do think that sometimes the buy-in can be an issue. And so if you have a class that oftentimes gets distracted when you're up here, and especially if they're using their laptops, push it to their screen. And you can do this. I've had students that needed help, and when I had my knee surgery, it's hard for me to walk. I could push my screen to theirs and type out and show them what to do. Same thing. Which is kind of fun. And like here you see, this is one of my classes. This is, I think, my orange one. And they weren't using their computers very much at that time. In fact, the only students that are on there are Apex students that were taken out of my class, and I just haven't removed them from my class list. So that's the only ones that are on there. So sometimes when you load a class and your kid's not in your classroom, you'll still get them, which is kind of interesting to see. And you can push your screen as a full screen so it takes over everything, or you can window it so they can have Word open and then you next to it and kind of copy along as they go. So that's kind of nice. I'm not sure, I didn't ask the kids if it's windowed, if there's an X out, but I doubt they can get rid of it. LanSchool's pretty good about that, about not giving them the option to like bypass their control. Sending messages is also really easy. You're going to select your student. You're going to click message and the little arrow next to it. If you just click message, it doesn't force them to read it. It just pops up down in their corner and they ignore it because they think it's, some dumb Microsoft update or whatever. But you can do send a message, and then there's a little checkbox that says force student to read this message, and you type it in here, right? And then you just hit send, and it pops up right in the middle, and they have to click OK to get rid of it. And usually that's all it takes. When Levi's photoshopping my face onto Emperor Hirohito of Japan, and I notice that, I can say, Levi, stop, and he does. You know, it's kind of funny. Some of the things they do when they think you're not looking are hilarious. So, LanSchool is infinite entertainment. I'll tell you that.
So like my junior high kids, like they don't have their own laptops. Like I have a set of laptops in my room.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way to do it with that or not?
Yeah, all it'll do is when because they have to sign in using their account, right? They'll it actually goes by account.
Oh,
So if they sign in on another person's laptop,
I can
they
still
can
see.
bypass you. I've discovered this, or you can always make sure you see them.
Okay.
And because it's a school device, it's all tied in.
Okay.
So, um, and I'm not gonna. I will tell you, LanSchool is kind of buggy sometimes. Sometimes your kid will be logged in your classroom on their account, and you won't be able to see their screen. And you have to like X out of it and restart the program, and that's okay, you know. Um, and that happens, but most of the time it's pretty reliable. It's just you've kind of got to get used to it. Voting. This was really interesting because I just discovered this and played around with it this past week. Um, so there's a little thing up here. I'll show you guys. It's one of the icons, and when you bring it up, it's this screen. So you have a true or false or a multiple choice, and you type your question in here. You lay out your answers or whatever, and then you just hit go, and it sends that whatever you typed out to them. So I sent them a question about the Attorney General potentially not being honest about contacts with Russia and whether or not he should recuse himself from any Russian investigations. Because we've been talking about 1984 and stuff like that. And so I said, you know, true equals yes, false equals no. And I had them vote, and it ended up coming up like this. And so as they vote, you can see the number of students that vote, and you can see how they're voting, which is a really interesting idea. Um, and 2/3 of the class ended up saying, you know, that he should recuse himself, and 1/3 said they, you know, no. Um, you could even make this more interactive by, you know, giving them options. Yes, he should absolutely recuse himself. He should only recuse himself in this situation. I don't have an opinion. All that kind of stuff, utilizing the multiple choice. Um, as far as I know, there's no point trackers or like gamification kind of ideas with this. It's purely just instant classroom data, which is kind of interesting still. Um, and then what you could obviously do is you could push this to their computers and say, look at the data we just collected. This is what your classroom thinks, you know, and maybe say, why might a third of the class not see a problem with this? Or why does 2/3 of the class seem to have a problem with this? And get into a deeper question. So, like I said, I've just started experimenting with this. It's definitely something I'm probably going to use more, and I think it's a really interesting idea. But if you're a Kahoot fan or anything like that, I don't see a reason necessarily to change over. Just because Kahoot does have that point system and the names and it's got sound effects and stuff. This is, you know, very business-like. So just something to consider. And then web blocking, and like I said, it can be tricky because some websites affect other websites. The internet's, you know, it's a net is the best way to think of it. There's a lot of overlap between things. So I really don't play with this a lot unless I see kids on game sites, specific game sites. And then what I will do is I will look at their URL. I'll go to manage web blocking. I'll put it in, and then I'll click apply, and then suddenly their game stops, and they're looking around like what's going on, and they start freaking out and reloading and things, um, you know, and I'll go up there and I'll be like, listen, this is what you were doing. This is going to be blocked for the rest of the class. Don't use it again. That kind of thing.
Like, does it block it every time then?
No, you have to actually enable the web blocking. So, you know, if little Johnny is playing pool on his computer, you know, I'll block it that day, and then when we come back, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt that they're going to stay and work. But if they prove themselves to not be able to do that, I might enable web blocking for them every time I open it up. But I actually, at this point, rarely use it. My two biggest classroom management things are just observing their screen and sending them messages. just because I think it's the most efficient way to do it. And the nice thing about sending a message is it doesn't call them out in front of everybody, so they're less likely to say anything or really get upset with you. Whereas, you have those students, the minute you say a word to me, even if it's just not out loud, you just walk up to me like, Kyle, I can't believe you're doing this. I wish you would stop. And they're like, oh, yeah, and, Kyle freaks out on me. You know, it's very anonymous, it's very quiet, If you do it kind of funny, why somebody's like, hey, look at this, look what Mr. Eiler sent me. And that's fine too, but they know then that they are being observed and that they're being held accountable. You can blank their screen. I'll show you guys how to do that. So if they're doing something you've warned them and you're kind of done with it, you can just turn off their screen, essentially. And you can set little messages that say, eyes to the front of the classroom, please, or something like that if they're doing something. And you can do that individually or whole class. So if you want them to have their laptops out, but you know that at times you're going to draw their attention away from that and don't want them to be able to interact with their screen, you can blank the class's screen and say, eyes up front. That way they're not going to, secretly be getting on Facebook or something. You can control the student's screen. And I mean that exactly what it sounds like. You can take control of their cursor and their keyboard and everything, and you can type, you can X out, you can, direct them to things. I don't do this very often. The most I do it is if I have kids that are just like goofing around too much, and I've sent them messages or I've talked to them, I'll take control, I'll X them out, and I'll say to the class, that's your last warning, and we'll move on after that. You can run and block programs. I've never done this, mainly because to run a program, you can just control and double click. But you can also, if you want every student to open a certain program, you can have the whole class run a program. And you can also block programs. So if you don't want students on Internet Explorer, Firefox, or Chrome, you can block those programs and they now have no internet access, period. Unless they have like Opera or Safari or some other browser, which is pretty rare. Like I said, there's the messaging, which is an awesome tool. I really like it. There's a chat feature. I've never used it, just because I think at that point, I'm just going to come talk to you or ask you to come up to me. Although I have had students put in like big bold letters on their screen on like a word, Mr. Eiler, I need help, come back here, because they're too lazy to raise their hand. It's really funny. And at that point, I literally say, you couldn't have said something to me. And then, like I said, there is a testing and assessment mode that I have not played with. I need to explore that a little bit. I'm probably not going to use it because most of my tests are handwritten. But, as we move more towards this online kind of world, it might be a good idea, because what I theorize is that it blocks certain things or allows you to make sure they don't open certain tabs and stuff like that, so they can't cheat or look up answers and whatnot. Which is a nice tool, especially if you're going to be doing practice air tests or whatnot. That's on there, and those web browsers do that stuff. They're secure browsers, so it's important to understand how that works. I believe that was my last thing. Oh, don't forget, and this has been a huge help to me. In the upper left, I think I said right, but it's actually upper left. In the upper left-hand corner, there's a tutorials button. And if you click that, it takes you to a web page, and you can ask LanSchool questions or click little links to find out things, just like you would like a help desk. And it's great for quick answers. When I was looking up certain things, it helped me. So don't forget about that. So let's look at LanSchool. To run it, it's usually down here in your down on the bottom. It's the little circle chain thing. Sometimes if it's not showing up, you actually have to type LanSchool in and find the app and click that, and that'll run it. But when you bring it up, this is what it looks like. And you used to have to create a channel. You don't need to do that anymore. The only reason I had to do it is because I didn't go to the Tech Tuesday on it. I just asked Mr. Poole for it. He's like, if you create your own channel, I'll authorize you to start using it. And that's because I was using it last year and already kind of knew how to, and I didn't want to go to another Tech Tuesday to get access. So he just kind of gave me the benefit of the doubt there. But the first one that we need to know is the administer, and that is where the one-to-one manage class list and load class list is. So if you manage it, that's where you go for browsing for students. Um, and this it takes a couple minutes because it has to go onto the network and find them. Um, so actually, this is kind of fun. I can get Carmen and Dory and all them right now because they're on student computers. So if we wanna get in on Lon right now, okay, we can and see what he's doing and send him a message. So all I would do is, and I'm not gonna do it because that's their privacy. But you can click who they are and you hit add, and it'll bring them up. You can even select all, and I can just go full on Big Brother today and look at the entire teaching staff. Um, if all of your students are here, but some of them aren't showing up, maybe they are not logged in yet, and they logged in after you did this, so you just hit refresh, and it'll re-bring up everybody who's on there. Um, I don't know what these non-logged in ones are, so that means somebody's logged in, maybe an administrator account or something. Uh, and then once you're done, so we'll do that again. We'll actually create a list real quick. Um, we'll add, Dory and Boggs. We'll hit add. I can save that as, and I save it to your T drive, so obviously, it doesn't get lost in case of something. You name your file, hit save, and there you go. So it's real simple that way. It's just like creating a saved document anywhere else. Um, and then you can just close it out. Obviously I don't want to save the changes for this because I'm not going to be observing teachers. No. Now, if I want to actually load a class list, I'll just go load class list. It'll bring up my T drive with my class list in there. And obviously nobody's going to be in it. Now this is, I think, best fit view. So if you go view thumbnails, you could actually change it. So if you have trouble seeing, you can go large, stuff like that. But if you double click, and while, Shane's not here, if you double click it, it'll bring it up full screen. And you can really kind of observe. And then all you have to do to get out of that is go back to view all, things like that. Pretty simple stuff.
So they have to be on a school laptop?
Yes, they have to be on a school laptop.
On their own device, we can't see theirs.
Yeah, if they're on their own device, at this point, no. Like I said, maybe Mr. Poole at one point will require students to have LanSchool loaded. I don't know what we'd have to do for that. And that's caused me some issues sometimes where I've known a student's not maybe getting as much work done as they could be. But usually it's not too big a deal. You go look over their shoulder, look for open tabs or programs that have been minimized, you can tell. But this is a really interesting way to do it. I know Mr. Poole in his classroom has this on his whiteboard during class, and kids will call each other out. Like, so-and-so's not doing what they're supposed to be doing, because if I can't get away with it, why should they get away with it? So, if you feel like doing that, I've not done that just because with writing, sometimes there's some personal things being said or written down. I don't want to necessarily embarrass the student, and I know I have kids who don't want other people to see what they're writing about. I've had students write about stories where they lost friendships, and I don't want to bring that up, So I don't necessarily do that all the time. But you can see, if I wanted to give Sean a thing, I could click message. I could click snapshot, which is, screenshot what they're doing. The control thing is right here. The vote, right? Bring up the vote. And you can save some of your voting, like questions and stuff like that, if you want to. That's up to you. That kind of stuff. But really, the best way to kind of learn with this, and this is just how I did it, because I didn't know all the options LanSchool gave me, is I just started clicking things randomly and seeing what happened. So, one day I accidentally pushed my screen to all the students, and it was open to, just like my Moodle grade book. And I was like, oh crap, and they're like, what is that? And I just muted my screen real quick, and I'm like, don't worry about it, but then I knew how to push my screen, right? The web limiting is interesting, because I can't get to it right now. Good.
So Mike, how are you pushing your screen if you've got this screen up?
Well, that's the thing. If I've got, my PowerPoint open, and I go to here and click push screen, initially it'll be this. And then I've got to click over to my PowerPoint and it'll go up. So whatever you do, even when you X out of your PowerPoint, it'll take you back to LanSchool, and you just go up there and you click it and end it. All of these buttons up at the top you can just click them once and it'll do pretty much what it's asking you to do. And if you click web limit, it'll say, do you want to just limit only the selected student or all student? And you just make the choice, And it's the same for message, are we sending this message to all students or one student? And it's very simple. The nice thing I like about this is I'm rather tech savvy and I've gotten better, but with new programs, I usually have to have somebody kind of show me the ropes. This LanSchool kind of prompts you for everything you need to know. And it also sets up warnings. Anytime you're going to do something that's going to be disruptive to the student's screen, it will tell you. So, are you sure you want to push your screen? Are you sure you want to control this screen? Are you sure you want to blank this or do that? And that way, if you accidentally click something, you're not going to break up the flow, which is really nice as well. You can turn that setting off, but I would recommend not, just because it is nice. Like when you go to blank screen, you can't do it without somebody up. Like when you go to the blank screen, you can actually set up what you want it to say and things like that, which is really nice. But yeah, and honestly, like I said, the most I use it for though is just watching what they're doing to make sure they're on task and messaging. So are there any other questions or things you want cleared up? You do also have to remember sometimes they bring up private information. They'll bring up their emails with college applications and like private identifying info. So if you're using LanSchool, keep an eye on it to make sure that other kids aren't able to get to that. Lock your computer if you leave, that kind of thing. That way that other students can't potentially. You could really do a lot of stuff. I famously changed Brighton's front page to like Fox News and stuff before because he hates it. And, we have a great relationship and we're messing around with him. But you could put things on other people's computers. You can force them to download stuff. And you got to be really careful with some of those things and what you're going to see. And then obviously keep in mind, if you see a student writing about something that maybe they shouldn't be writing about, or, you're now lawfully or legally required to kind of report that. So I guess there's a big using it for ethical good and moral good question sometimes. And that's why the only time I use LanSchool is when they're using their PCs and they're supposed to be on it. I don't load it up and watch kids in other classes.
So like if I had a sub, like that night, I could go in and see what they did during my class that day?
Mm-hmm.
Like if they were on there?
Yes.
Have to be logged in though, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, if the sub is your login or something, they can get to it, but otherwise.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure, maybe from your school laptop, you could access it like while you're at home. I'm not sure though, I've never tried that. Because I don't use my school laptop, I have my personal laptop that I use for that stuff. So, yeah, I mean, it's a great tool. There is a big temptation to sit at your desk and watch them because it's really, really easy. Because I could control my entire classroom from my desk and say, you're supposed to be on Moodle, you're supposed to be working on this journal and finding these sources, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I could just send them messages the whole time and never get up and walk around. So you've also got to be like very cognizant of what your behavior is in the classroom. You don't want them to think of you as, the Wizard of Oz behind the screen. So I make sure that if they're doing things maybe they shouldn't be doing, I'll get up and walk around first and give them that opportunity. Oh, he's walking around. Maybe I should X out of this. Um, I had one student, all he was doing was watching YouTube videos and listening to the music and staring at the clock. And instead of Xing him out of YouTube and causing a big scene, I just walked back there and said, why don't we get to work? I noticed you're not getting anything done. And at first I'm like, well, how do you know? I'm like, I have your screens up on front. I can see everything you're doing. I've been very honest about that. I will tell them, remember, I can see what you're doing at all times. Because I don't want them to think I'm some mystical creature. I want them to know that they're, that what the expectation is. And then, like I said, some teachers project it and things like that. So, any other questions or things like that? You know, so yeah, the only ones you really want to remember, like for sure, are how to go administer one-to-one, manage and load class lists. Oh, and if you don't dismiss your current class, other teachers can't necessarily pick them up. So at the end, you need to hit dismiss, and it'll go through the little spinny circle again, and then they'll be gone. Right? And that can be annoying. But so the administer one-to-one, manage, load, and dismiss, those are the big things. I don't know what a dynamic class list is. I've not played with that at all. I don't know if that means like when they walk in, if they're on your Wi-Fi, they get selected. I'm not sure, because my channel's associated with my Wi-Fi. Um, Also keep in mind just like the control and the message. Those are the other ones I use the most. I don't really blank screens often. I don't limit web often. And I've just recently started doing the voting and testing thing, so I haven't gotten a chance to use that. I've never either pushed a student screen. You can push student screens, which might make it easier when they're giving presentations instead of having to send you the thing and you bring it up and it's on your computer and they're using their computer to control the presentation. They could potentially use their own and push it to all their student screens. That's up to you. But I've never pushed a student screen just because obviously there's things to be careful of, their privacy and things like that. Um, you know, but they also need to know that if they're using a student laptop, a school laptop, there is no reasonable expectation that somebody's not going to see what's on there. So they have things on there that they shouldn't. If they have games, if they're using proxies to get around the firewall and get on Facebook, we can know very easily. And if I see that kind of stuff, I screenshot it and I send it to Mr. Poole so that he has a chance to, delete that from the student's computer. Because I don't want my kids playing Grand Theft Auto. I don't want them getting on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram in my classroom. I want them utilizing the writing time as writing time, or whatever you guys are going to be teaching.
So where do you screenshot? Where do you go?
Well, if you hit snapshot here, it'll do it. But also if you hit the right Windows key and print screen up at the top, it'll do that and save it to your images folder on your computer. That's how I usually do it, is just because it's a little bit easier. But yes, the right Windows and then print screen. So if you do that, like I'll do this one right now. You see that dim, that was the print screen. And then if I go to this, well, maybe this PC pictures, just these screenshots, and then whatever your most recent one is. So yeah, I don't know where the snapshot goes. I'm sure you can create a pathway to a folder, but we already have the print screen, so there's no point in using it. Any other questions? I mean, at this point, if you would like to go back to your classroom, log on, and maybe create a class list, that might be difficult right now since students aren't here.
So they need to be logged on and do the class list then?
Yes,
Okay.
I think so. Because they weren't showing up just now for me. So that might be, maybe if their laptops are here, I'm not 100% sure. But the way I did it was once school got started and I got LanSchool set up, I would just have my students, while they're journaling or whatever, log on, add them all to that class list and save it. That way I just knew who all was in my classroom. It's a little bit easier than maybe flipping back and forth between a document or something like that. Um, and there's some maintenance, removing and adding kids. I've had, the 3 students in that one class are in Apex. I need to remove them. I just keep forgetting because I haven't been using LanSchool as much because we've been in a reading section. But now that we're getting back into a writing section of my class, I'll be using LanSchool a lot more. So that's the way it kind of works. So once we come back and I have time, I'll remove those couple kids and we'll be good to go. So. Yeah, and if you need any help at any point, come find me. I have 4th block plan, so it's pretty easy for me to come around and, say, oh, you just need to do this or show you something or anything like that. Wrestling ends Saturday, so after that I can stop after school too, and we can sit down and figure it out. But I like it. It's definitely a great classroom management tool. Keeps them on task, or at least keeps them from getting into things they shouldn't be getting into, which I think is also important. So